Hello and good morning friends, welcome to this CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, taking our series forward on microeconomics. Today we would be talking on modern theory of factor pricing in the first session, whereas in the second session we would be talking on Ricardian theory of rent. And for this discussion we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Kamlesh Ghakkar. Dr. Kamlesh Ghakkar is a professor in Institute of Management Studies and Research, Maharishi Dayanand University, Rohtak. Dr. Ghakkar has written in numerous books as well as a number of articles have been published in reputed journals both at national and international levels, as well as a number of students are pursuing their PhD under her able guidance. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Kamlesh Ghakkar and let's try to know more and more through her. Hello ma'am, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Dear viewers, today I am going to discuss about the modern theory of factor pricing. Till now we have done marginal productivity theory of pricing, which took into account only the demand side of a factor for the determination of its price. But the modern economists are of the view that just like the prices of a commodity, price of a factor is also determined by its demand as well as its supply. So we will have to take into account what are the factors affecting demand for a factor and what are the factors affecting supply of a factor. Factor price is determined at the point where demand for and supply of that factor is equal. For example, we want to know how the wage rate is determined by means of demand and supply. So where demand and supply of labor become equal, that will determine the wage rate. If the wage rate is kept high, naturally there will be a mismatch between demand and supply. If factor price is high, there will be more supply leading to fall in the wage rate, and if there is less wage rate determined, then there will be more demand for labor leading to rise in the wage rate. So price will be determined only by the intersection of demand and supply. So prices of all the factors like rent for land, interest for capital and profit for entrepreneur are determined by their demand and supply. Firstly, we will see how the demand curve for a factor is determined. We will see demand for a factor in case of perfect computation in both factor market and product market. In such condition, value of marginal product VMP and marginal revenue product are equal. We will consider three cases. One is a competitive firm demand curve for a single variable factor, a competitive firm's demand curve for a factor when other factors are variable, and a competitive industry's demand curve for a factor. So how we can find out the competitive firm's demand curve for a single variable factor? This derivation is illustrated in figure 1. Here we have taken labor on x-axis and price of factor, or you can say the wage rate, is on y-axis. Actually the demand curve for a single variable factor when other factors are constant, it is actually the marginal revenue productivity curve, but it is only the downward sloping marginal revenue productivity curve. The upward rising MRP is not a part of the demand curve for a factor. So according to this, we can find out if the price of the factor is OP, then demand for labor or demand for a factor will be ON, because at this point MRP is equal to the factor price, and just now I have told you that MRP is also equal to the value of marginal product. Why? Because VMP is equal to MPP into AR and MRP is equal to MPP, which means marginal physical product multiplied by the marginal revenue. But in case of perfect computation, we know AR is equal to MR. So that is why VMP and MRP are same in case of perfect computation. So MRP will be equated to the wage rate, or you can say कि MRP of any factor will be equated to its marginal factor cost, and that will determine the level of employment of that factor. In the figure we have seen that if price is OP, then demand is ON. If the price falls to OP1, then demand for the factor rises to ON1, and if price falls to OP2, demand for the factor increases to ON2. Thus you see that downward sloping part of the MRP curve is the demand curve for a factor when only one factor is variable but other factors are kept constant, and there is a negative relationship between wage rate and employment. Higher the wage rate, lower the employment, lower the wage rate, higher the employment for demand for employment. We have seen that MRP curve firstly rises, but ultimately it goes on declining, and falling portion of MRP is relevant as firm's equilibrium in the factor market requires that MRP is equal to MFC as well as MRP cuts MFC from above. So under perfect computation, downward sloping part of MRP curve of the factor is the demand curve for that factor. Demand curve for a factor of production for the whole competitive industry can be obtained by the lateral summation of the MRP or VMP curves of all the firms in the industry. Now we will see how the firm's demand curve for a factor is determined when all the factors are variable. Now in this case, we will take that we are increasing labor, and with that labor we need more capital also. So when more capital is employed along with labor, then marginal revenue productivity of the labor increases, or you can say value of marginal product also increases. So VMP will shift to the right. At first wage rate there is one MRP having some stock of capital, but when the wage rate falls, then VMP shifts to the right because of the addition of capital also. Now we will see what is the demand for labor at the lower wage rate corresponding to the new value of marginal product, and we will get the demand curve for a factor in case all factors are variable for a competitive firm, and this curve will be found to be more elastic as compared to the value of marginal product curves for the firm. This is shown in figure 2. In figure 2, we have shown labor on x-axis, wage rate and MRP are shown on y-axis. We have one value of marginal productivity curve VMP 1 corresponding to some capital level K1, and when the wage rate is OW, we find that ON labor is being demanded at this wage rate. So we have one point E. Now when the wage rate falls to OW1, if the VMP remains same, demand for labor is ON1. But actually what happens that more capital is also employed, so that leads to change in VMP. Now VMP shifts to VMP2 corresponding to the new amount of capital K2. It has shifted to the right. That value of marginal product of labor has increased. Now we will see that OW1 demand for labor is ON2 and not the ON1. So you get another point T. By joining the point E and T, we get the demand curve for labor for a competitive firm when all the factors are variable. And it is clear from the diagram that this demand curve is more elastic as compared to VMP1 or VMP2. Then we will see how we can find out the demand curve for a competitive industry. Due to fall in wage rate, all firms employ more labor, leading to increase in production and lowering of price of the product. We know value of marginal product is equal to MPP into AR. So as the price of a product falls, VMP will shift to the left. This is shown in figure 3. Now in figure 3, we have made two diagrams. On the left side, we are showing demand for a factor by a firm, and on the right side, we have shown demand for a factor by the industry as a whole. On the x-axis, we have taken demand for labor, and on y-axis, we have shown wage rate and VMP. Now, we can see that first value of marginal product is VMP1. When the wage rate is OW, then demand for labor is ON. And what happens now that when the demand wage rate falls, and actually we will see what is the demand for factor by the industry as a whole, and that is the summation of value of marginal product curves, that is summation VMP1. So at OW, demand for labor by the industry is OL. Now when the wage rate falls to OW1, if the VMP is VMP1, then demand for labor is ON1. But actually what happens? When the more labor and more capital is employed, production rises. Due to rise in production, price falls, and due to fall in the price, value of marginal product will also decline, because value of marginal product is equal to marginal physical productivity into price. Now new price is lower than the earlier one, so this would lead to fall or to the shifting of VMP curve to the left. Value of marginal product will decline due to fall in the price of the product. Now you see VMP has shifted to the left and it has become VMP2. So at OW1 price of the factor, the demand for labor by one firm is ON2. And supposing we take that there are 100 firms, so we can find out the demand for labor by one firm multiplied by 100, and that will tell you what is the demand for a factor which is labor by all the firms in the industry as a whole. So in the right hand diagram, actually we have taken ON multiplied by 100 or ON2 multiplied by 100 because we are showing it for the industry. So at OW1, this labor demand is now ON2 because of the shifting of VMP to VMP2, and now we can see again that we will take the summation of value of marginal product of 2 of all the firms together, and this will be again summation of VMP to the left of the earlier one, and we see that at wage rate OW1, demand for labor by the industry as a whole is OL2 and not OL1. By joining GH, we get the demand curve for labor for the industry as a whole, and it is clear from the figure that this demand curve is less elastic as compared to VMP1 and VMP2. So this shows how there is demand curve derived for the industry as a whole. So this, and you can also know what are the factors affecting demand for a factor which is variable. Number one is the price of the input. The higher the price of factor, the smaller the demand for its services. Second is the marginal physical product of factor. Third is the price of the commodity produced by the factor, because VMP is equal to MPP into price. Another one is the amount of other factors combined with labor, the prices of other factors, the technological progress. We know technological progress changes the marginal physical productivity of all inputs. Now we'll see how the supply of factors is there in the economy. Marginal productivity theory took into account only demand side, but modern theorists have taken into account both demand and supply. So supply of factors is the amount of factor which is offered for sale at various alternative prices. From the viewpoint of nature of supply, factors are divided into two classes: original and produced factors. Produced factors are the intermediate physical inputs such as capital equipment, steel, cement, fuels, which are themselves produced in some industries and are used as inputs for the production of other goods. Supply curve depends upon the laws of production. So we can see what is the change in the marginal cost of production. In case of rising MC, supply curve slopes upward, and in case of falling MC, supply curve slopes downward. Now we can see what is the supply of all factors of production. Firstly, we take into account supply of land. Land and labor are the primary factors of production. For the economy as a whole, supply of land is fixed. It is perfectly inelastic. Cost of production has no relevance for the supply of land. Land is a free gift of nature to the society. For the society as a whole, supply curve is shown in figure 4. Land is shown on x-axis, rent is shown on y-axis, and OM is the supply of labor, and this remains constant. So supply curve is parallel to y-axis. We cannot increase or decrease the supply of labor because of land because it is fixed. Supply of land for a particular industry is not perfectly inelastic. For a particular use, supply of land can be increased by shifting of land from other uses or industries. In figure 5, supply curve of land is the rising one. If the rent rises, supply also rises. Supply curve of land to a particular use, crop or industry is elastic and slopes upward from left to right. Here we have shown that supply curve of land is upward rising. This is for any particular field or particular industry. This is as rent rises, supply of land rises for that purpose. Supply of capital. Capital goods are produced factors. Supply of capital goods is determined by the same factors which determine the supply of consumer goods. It depends upon the cost conditions. The supply curve of capital can be upward sloping, downward sloping, or horizontal line depending upon the marginal cost. Supply of financial capital is positively related to the rate of interest. This means higher the rate of interest, higher would be the supply, lower the rate of interest, lower would be the supply of financial capital. Now we will see the supply of labor. This we have already discussed in earlier lectures also, that for an individual, supply curve of labor is backward sloping. This shows that up to some wage rate, supply of labor by an individual goes on rising, but after a certain wage rate which is quite high, then labour becomes costly, and when all the needs of a labourer are met and he wants to have some labour also, so in that case, with the rise in wage rate per hour, he is now willing to work for less hours. So supply of individual labour then goes on declining. This is shown in figure 6, that your supply curve is firstly rising and then it is bending towards y-axis. But for the economy as a whole, the supply curve of labour is upward rising. That means higher the wage rate, higher is the supply of labour, and lower the wage rate, lower is the supply of labour. You see, where in the fields where the wages are high or where the salaries are high, more people are willing to work in that field. So in that field supply would be more. So supply curve is upward sloping. Now what are the main determinants of supply? Number one is the price of labour or wage rate. We have seen that there is a positive relationship between wage rate and supply of labour. Higher the wage rate, higher is the supply, lower the wage rate, lower is the supply. Size of population also affects the supply. The countries which are having a small size of population, naturally supply of labour would be less. And the countries which are having high population, just like China and India, we see that there is more labour supply, and that is why MNCs are coming to India and China, because there is availability of the labour for doing work. Then labour force participation rate, that is also essential. People are there, but if they are not willing to work, supply would be less. So it depends upon how many people are willing to work at the going wage rate. This supply also depends upon the occupational, educational and geographical distribution of the labour force. Now, after looking at the demand for and supply of labour or of any factor, we come to the determination of factor price. We have taken here the example of labour. So labour is shown on x-axis and on y-axis we have shown the wage rate. Demand curve for labour is downward sloping and it has been derived from the marginal revenue product curve. Supply of labour is upward rising. Both are intersecting each other at A. So at A you find that wage rate is OW and demand for and supply of labour are equal to ON. At all other wage rates, demand and supply are not equal to each other. We can see here, if the wage rate is OW1, you see at this wage rate, demand for labour is up to this, while the supply of labour is more. More people are willing to work at this wage rate, but the demand is less. So there will be excess supply of labour. There will be competition among the workers, and this would lead to fall in the wage rate, and wage rate will fall from OW1 to OW. And if the wage rate is kept OW2, then what happens? This wage rate is less than the equilibrium wage rate OW. Here supply of labour is less while the demand for labour is very high. So this is the gap. GH is the gap between demand for labour and supply of labour. Demand is more, then more firms are demanding more of the labour, but supply is less. So naturally they will be willing to give more wages to the labourers so that they can be employed for the production of commodities and services, and this would lead to increase in the wage rate. So thus we reach at the conclusion that just like the price of a commodity in the market is determined by its demand and supply, similarly the factor price is also determined by its demand and supply. You must have seen that when the demand for a certain factor goes on increasing, then naturally its price rises, but when the supply is more, its price definitely falls. So this was about the modern theory of factor pricing. Thank you. Dear viewers, in this lecture we will be discussing about Ricardian theory of rent. Generally, rent is defined as any periodic payment made regularly for the hire of a good. For example, the rent paid for houses, flats, shops, television, machinery, etc., where these are not bought outright. But in economics, rent is considered as a payment made for the factors of production which are having imperfectly elastic supply, with land as the main example. There are mainly two theories of economic rent. One is Ricardian theory of rent and the other is modern theory of rent. So today we are going to discuss about the Ricardian theory of rent. Classical economists regarded rent as the return to the factor of production, land. According to Ricardo, rent is that portion of the produce of the earth which is paid to the landlord for the original and indestructible powers of the soil. Ricardian theory is based on a large number of assumptions. Number one is long run. We are not talking of the short run, we are talking of the long run period. Population is rising. In this theory, it has been assumed that population goes on increasing, so that is why demand for food grains will also be increased. Land is used only for the production of food grains. It has been assumed that there is no other use of land except for the production of food grains. Other uses of land are ignored in this theory. Then there is a perfect computation. In perfect computation, we know there are a large number of buyers, large number of sellers. Neither the buyer nor the seller has any control over the price of the commodity, and average revenue is equal to the marginal revenue in this case. Land differs in fertility. It has been assumed here that there are different varieties of land and the cultivation is done in order of decreasing fertility. What does this imply? That the most fertile land is cultivated first, then the fertility goes on decreasing, and lastly we will be making use of the land which is the least fertile land. Law of diminishing returns operates on land. Law of diminishing return is that when one factor is varied keeping the other factors constant, the marginal productivity of the variable factor will ultimately go on declining. That is the law of diminishing returns, and that is operative on land. Homogeneous units of the variable factor. The factor which we are increasing is having the same quality. Quality of the variable factor should not change with the increase in the number of units. It is also assumed that there is no change in technology. Technology remains same. There is a marginal land on which there is no rent. All other lands which are above this marginal land or whose productivity is more than marginal land, they will be getting rent, but this marginal land will not get any rent. It has been also assumed that land has original and indestructible powers, and for these powers landlord is paid rent. Land is scarce and landlord is paid rent because of this scarcity, and rent arises due to difference in the fertility of land. So Ricardian theory of rent is based on all these assumptions. Now we will see how rent is determined under extensive cultivation. Firstly, we should know what is extensive cultivation. In extensive cultivation, more land is brought under cultivation for increasing production. For the determination of rent, Ricardo gave an example of a newly colonized country. Suppose in a country there are three kinds of land, A, B and C. A is the most fertile land, B is less fertile and C is the least fertile land. When people come to this region to colonize it, firstly they do farming on A type of land. Output on this land is maximum given the cost in terms of labor and capital. Suppose the production of wheat on this land is 10 quintals of wheat and cost of labor and capital employed is rupees 4,000. In this case, price of wheat will be rupees 400 per quintal, because when we divide 4,000 by 10 quintals of wheat, we get the price as rupees 400. In the beginning, A grade land is sufficient to feed the population, so there is no rent on this land. With the increase in population, there is use of now B land also, because A land is completely used but population is rising and demand for food is rising, so then land B, which is less fertile, is brought under cultivation. Now we find that the production of wheat on this land B is 8 quintals of wheat, while it was 10 quintals on land A. Now the cost of production is the same, that was taken as rupees 4,000. So now the price of wheat will be 4,000 divided by 8 is equal to rupees 500. Now the owner of land A will get rent according to the surplus output which this land is providing. Land A gave the output of 10 quintals while land B is giving the output of 8 quintals. So the difference is of 2 quintals of wheat. So in this situation, the rent on land A will be 500 multiplied by 2, that is rupees 1,000. But there will be no rent on land B. Now with further increase in population, even C grade land is brought under cultivation. Here output produced is only 5 quintals of wheat. Now price of wheat will be rupees 4,000 divided by 5 is equal to rupees 800. In the new situation, land A will get rent equal to the money value of surplus output, that is 10 minus 5 is equal to 5 quintals of wheat multiplied by rupees 800, that is equal to rupees 4,000. B grade land will also get rent. Surplus output on this land is equal to 8 minus 5, 3 quintals of wheat. So money value of this surplus is 3 multiplied by 800 is equal to rupees 2,400. So C land is the marginal land. There will be no rent on this land, and this determination of rent has been explained in figure 1. Now we have shown this figure and we have taken A grade land, B grade land and C grade land. On x axis we have shown output for all the 3 parts of this diagram. On y axis we are showing price and cost. We have taken, take the example of only firstly A grade land is brought under cultivation because the size of population is small. Now at this, what happens, that the price is OP, which is equal to the average cost of production and marginal cost of production for grade A land, and because of the perfect competition. In the long run we know there are only normal profits for the firm. So price is equal to AC is equal to MC, and output produced is OM, and there is no rent on land A. But as the population rises and there is increase in demand for food grains, B land is brought under cultivation, and B land is less fertile. Here the average cost of production is more, and we have shown AC2 and MC2. Now at these cost curves we find that price of the wheat is determined as OP1 instead of OP. Now at OP1 price there is no rent on B grade land because still it is sufficient, but the land A will get rent. We will see that now the price is OP1, while the average cost of production is up to M1 S1. So here the rent is P1 E1, S1 and T1 for the owner of the grade land A. Now, as there is further increase in population, B land is now completely used and there is demand for land C also. So, land of grade C is also brought under cultivation. What do you see here? That here the average cost is the highest. We have taken AC3 and MC3. Now again the price must be equal to the average cost and marginal cost. So the new price of wheat is OP2. Just as in the example I told you that firstly when only A grade land was used, price was 400, then it rose to 500, and when C grade land was used, price of wheat increased to rupees 800. Now the price is OP2. Now B grade land will also get rent because here now OP2, that is greater than the average cost of production on B grade land. So P2 F1 GR is the rent accruing to the landlord of B grade, and the landlord of A grade land will get the highest rent because at here you can see OP2 is the price and average cost is only up to M2 S2. So the total rent is P2 E2 S2 and T2. This is the rent which is being provided to the A grade land. So this was the case of extensive cultivation in which we have seen that we are bringing into cultivation all types of land. Firstly, A land is brought under cultivation, no rent is there. When B land is brought under cultivation, there is rent on land A, and when C land is also brought under cultivation because of the increased population and increased demand for food grains, then even land B will also get rent, but C is the marginal land, or that is also called no rent land, because here price is just equal to the average cost of production and the landlord of land C grade will not get any rent. So this was extensive cultivation, and now we will go on to intensive cultivation. Now in intensive cultivation, more of labor and capital is employed on the same land to increase production. Rent arises in case of intensive cultivation also. As more and more doses of labor and capital are employed on the same piece of land, a state is finally reached where a particular dose, which represents a specific combination of labor and capital, brings forth output just equal to the cost of production. Diminishing returns are experienced with the application of successive doses of labor and capital. The dose where output is equal to the cost of production is called the marginal dose. All earlier doses will yield rent. Intensive cultivation can also be explained with the help of figure 1. Now in the same figure, we take the left hand side figure, we take only the case of supposing A grade land, and we will show that what happens when more and more doses of labor and capital are employed on the same land. We know there is law of diminishing returns. As more and more labor and capital will be employed, marginal productivity of the labor will fall, or you can say cost of production will rise, leading to rise in the price of wheat. So the last dose which we have taken as the marginal dose where the cost of production is just equal to the revenue obtained from the sale of the commodity produced by the labor and capital. So that is the marginal land, but marginal labor. But before this, all the doses will be getting rent. Now in this figure you can see that firstly when OP is the price of the factor or rent of the land is not there, this is price of wheat. Now OM is the output produced by employing some labor and capital. Now as demand for production rises and more labor and capital is employed on the same land, then output rises to OM1. But this is done with the increased cost, so now the price rises to OP1. So at OP1 price, there is rent on the land, and that is P1, E1, S1 and T1. And when more doses of labor are employed to increase the production, as the demand for food grain rises, the price rises to OP2. Now at OP2 price, the production is OM2 and dose of labor and capital is more. So what you find here again, that on this piece of land, now price is greater than the average cost of production and rent is P2, E2, S2 and T2. That is the rent on the earlier doses of labor and capital. So even in case of intensive cultivation, rent will definitely be there, and that will be on the super marginal doses of labor and capital. Or you can see the rent will be total revenue minus total cost of production. Now this theory has told us that rent arises in both cases of extensive and intensive cultivations. Rent is due to the difference in fertility of land. In case of extensive cultivation, fertility is different on different qualities of land. In case of intensive cultivation, fertility is different for different doses of labor and capital. According to Ricardo, rent is determined by the price. Higher the price of food grains, higher is the rent. It has been explained in extensive as well as intensive cultivation that it is the price of the wheat which determines rent. When the price of wheat is high, more rent accrues to the land, and if the price of wheat is less, then less rent accrues to the land. So according to Ricardo, because land is a free gift of nature and for the society as a whole, it is completely inelastic in supply. So the whole of the earnings of the land become rent and it depends only on the price. So according to him, rent is not a part of the price of the product, rather it is the price which determines rent. So generally it is quoted that when corn is high, rent is high, and this was said by Ricardo. Now we will see the critical evaluation of the Ricardian theory of rent. There are various drawbacks of the Ricardian theory of rent. Number one is, it has been said that rent is paid because of the original and indestructible powers of the soil. According to critics, it is very difficult to know which is the original and indestructible power of the soil and which is the man-made power of the soil. You know, fertility of land is increased by applying more manure and chemicals to the land. So, it is very difficult to know whether the production is due to the original powers of the soil or it is due to the man-made powers. So, rent is paid due to fertility of land, maybe it is of any reason, while Ricardo said it is only because of the original and indestructible powers. So, he has been criticized on this ground also. Secondly, he said that the most fertile land is cultivated first, and historically this has not been found true. Generally what happens, that fertile land is generally covered with forests. So, human beings have cultivated the land which was easily available, or they do not have to put in more hard work. So, the most fertile land was not firstly used, rather less fertile land has been used first. There is no such land which does not earn any rent. According to Ricardo, we have seen that there is a land which does not get any rent, that is a marginal land. But in real life, we do not find any such situation. Actually, rent is there on all types of land. No doubt rent may differ, but rent is not zero on any type of land. Then according to Ricardo, rent arises only because of the difference in the fertility of land. According to him, if the quality of land is uniform, if all the land is of same quality, there would not have been any rent. But actually rent arises due to scarcity. Even if the land is of uniform quality, there will be rent because land is scarce in relation to its demand. It is based on the assumption of perfect computation. We know in real life perfect computation is not there. There is imperfect computation, there is monopoly, there is monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and even in factor market also there is no perfect competition. So, it has been criticized on this ground also. According to Ricardo, only it is the land which is getting rent. But according to modern economists, all factors can get rent provided their supply is inelastic. So, whenever the supply of a factor is inelastic and its demand rises, it will be getting rent. Supposing a maid charges rupees 100 for a day in daily routine, but when we are in more demand, supposing some function is there or marriages are there and their demand is more but their supply is inelastic, so then we pay them more. Supposing instead of rupees 100 we pay them rupees 200. So, in that case rupees 100 will be the rent for that maid. So, rent can be for any factor of production, not only for land. And this theory took into account only long run. According to Professor Keynes, in the long run we are all dead. He says that the theory should be concerned with the short run. This theory says that rent is determined by the price, but the modern economists say that rent is a part of cost of production and rent influences price and not the otherwise. They say that when rent is high, then naturally price of the commodity also rises. Actually, this difference lies in the fact that Ricardo took the land for the society as a whole, and in that case the supply of land is perfectly inelastic. But when we think of the land supply for an industry for a particular use, then naturally it is not perfectly inelastic, and in that case rent does enter price. Situation rent has not been talked of in case of Ricardian theory of rent. You know, situation also affects, location affects the rent. The land which is near the market is always paid more rent as compared to the land which is away from the market. So, what can be concluded? So, Ricardian theory of rent no doubt has been criticized on various grounds. It has importance in the determination of rent. Landlords get rent without any sacrifice. Their income is not the product of any labor, and consequently antisocial economists like James Mill, J.S. Mill, Henry George and Leon Walras were inspired by Ricardian theory of rent, and they advocated confiscation of rent or its socialization by means of taxation. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us a very, very insightful lecture on the modern theory of factor pricing and Ricardian theory of rent. Ma'am, if we talk about the two theories, what is the major difference between the two?
In the modern theory, we talked about that it is the demand and supply both which affect the price of a factor of production. But in the Ricardian theory of rent, it has mainly taken the supply side only. Demand has not been considered because Ricardo took that supply of land is completely fixed and that differs in fertility. So that is why this factor pricing, and it is mainly related to land only. So that was given by Ricardo. While in modern theory of factor pricing, we are talking of all the factors of production, whether it is land, labor, capital or entrepreneur.
Although there are different theories for both land or for the price, we would say, but does the theories are modified according to the needs and the demands?
Naturally, no doubt they are having their own significance. Earlier, if we think that the land is fixed, and you know, for the society is fixed, so in that case the whole price of land is the rent. But so far as the use of land for different uses is concerned, you see that land can be used for various purposes. It can be used for food grains, it can be used for housing, it can be used for any purpose. So naturally the rent will be mainly determined by according to demand and supply, and you have seen that the rent is rising day by day because of the rising population. Demand for housing for population is very essential, but land is limited, so that is why rent is increasing too much. And in those cases where you can see you can make use of some other factor, etc., so then the rent can be reduced, otherwise not. So actually both theories are having importance from one point or the other.
Another point, definitely. Dear friends, we believe that each of the content is very, very important for you. Therefore, we arrange lectures for you on different topics under the broad series, and all the lectures pertaining to the series microeconomics have been conducted. Now we have almost 4 lectures remaining under the series. So these lectures would be conducted very soon for you, and very soon we are going to sum up. We are going to wrap up with the series, but yes, of course, we would be starting a new series very soon. Till then, we would like you to go through all the lectures, and afterwards, if you feel that there is some question to be answered, then you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. So we would be meeting up with the next session with Dr. Kamlesh Ghakkar very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.